Welcome to today's webinar. We're just waiting for a few more people to get signed in. It'll be a few moments. Again, for those who are just joining us, thank you for joining us today. We're just going to be a few moments while people get signed in. Okay, we're gonna get started now. So we do have, looks like some people are now, they're signed in. I'm seeing some questions coming in, so that's good. So thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar. It's a COVID-19 update with myself, Hunter Boucher, Director of Operations at LandlordBC, and our CEO, David Hutniak. There, you'll find a Q&A feature as part of this webinar, so please go ahead and send your questions to us. Go ahead and send them throughout the webinar, but we will be getting to those questions at the end of our presentation. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Our sponsor for this webinar is the Home Depot Pro. The Home Depot Pro understands reopening after a pandemic is an unpredictable challenge. Across the country, property owners and managers are navigating the process of restoring facilities, resuming operations, and recovering business. As we prepare to tackle the uncharted ground of opening after a virtually global quarantine, the Home Depot Pro is here to help you establish the new normal. Our business can help you get back in business. Whether you are reconfiguring workspaces or implementing new health and safety standards, the Home Depot Pro has the products and services needed to meet your evolving business needs. Home Depot Pro also offers additional benefits to members of LandlordBC through its national account agreement. Visit homedepot.ca/pro or contact LandlordBC's national account manager for further details. Again, thank you so much to our sponsor, Home Depot Pro. So to begin our presentation, we'll talk a little bit about our mission, what LandlordBC is all about. LandlordBC is BC's top resource for owners and managers of rental housing. We are the leading landlord professional industry association in BC, and our mission is to provide a strong voice for industry and to give members the support and resources they need to make doing business easy and successful. So I'm going to now turn over the presentation to our CEO, David Hutniak. David, are you on the line?
Yeah, I am. Thank you, Hunter. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm here from my personal studio, also known as the master bedroom. So I hope everyone is well and safe, and that the last 3.5 months haven't been too challenging for you. The term unprecedented times has been overused, but really I can't think of a more appropriate term to describe what we've experienced thus far, and frankly what we're continuing to experience. So what I'm going to do in the time I have here is really try and give you a sense for the last 3.5 months, and when the coronavirus first struck, what LandlordBC sort of did initially and the interactions we had with the provincial government in particular through the last 3 months to get us to where we are today, and then speak pardon me, briefly to sort of some future issues vis-a-vis COVID-19. And then really, looking forward, talk to you about the continuing areas that we're advocating for our sector, so that just to give you a flavor for some of the issues that we have been working on and we're going to be continuing to work on now that we're, in effect, moving to a more of a state of normalcy. But I think it's really important to maybe give you an appreciation for how we look at advocacy in terms of a strategy for LandlordBC, and that's the slide on the monitor here right now. And it's basically our strategy is to continually expand our influence with all levels of government, and obviously the provincial government is the one that we interact with the most. But really, it's about maintaining a proactive and positive advocacy role with governments, media, and stakeholders to promote and conserve the interests and rights of those engaged in the rental housing industry. The second part of the strategy is to continue to promote reliance on LandlordBC in development of government legislation, respond to policy issues from all levels of government as required. And finally, it's to continue to maintain and enhance our collaborative and consultative role with the residential tenancy branch. I would like to say that we, as an organization, have really spent a lot of time and energy in ensuring that we have positive relationships with government. And again, as I said, particularly with the provincial government, we view ourselves as largely a nonpartisan organization. And our role is to ensure that we're there to partner and support the government in what they're doing vis-a-vis our sector in particular. And we've always taken pride in the fact that our approach to advocacy is one focused on professionalism, respect, ensuring that we're part of the solution, and really looking at not just helping landlords, but ensuring that renters are also protected, because after all, they are our customers. Hunter, if you would just go to the next slide real quickly then. So this will be the only other slide I have. So if you're wondering why no slide changes are occurring, it's just, we're just gonna leave this one up while I speak to the issues that I wish to touch on. But basically, as the previous slide articulated, everything we've been doing through this COVID-19 pandemic period has really been driven by that core strategy in the context of the advocacy and our role in partnering with government. LandlordBC was actually, we were kind of ahead of the curve, to be honest with you. We saw very quickly in early March that something was unfolding here that was going to be potentially hugely challenging for our sector. And we actually started reaching out to our members before, the coronavirus really became a media item. And we started really talking internally about the need for us to encourage our members to start conversations with their tenants, to really begin that engagement process, because we could see that this was something that was going to be unique and could have some potentially significant impacts, and needless to say, it has. So we weren't waiting really for government to start down their path of implementing policy and to sort of address this issue. We were encouraging our members to start the conversation with their tenants. And really, the other thing that we encouraged from the beginning and throughout this last 3.5 months is that we wanted our members and really the broader sector to ensure that, they were dealing with their tenants in a sensitive manner, that the engagement and exchanges were constructive, and that the necessary or appropriate level of compassion was there, because these are highly unusual times. It's tough for everyone. And, we've always taken the attitude, we're all in this together. And that was really sort of the cornerstone of our approach to this entire crisis as it started to unfold. I also would like to say real quickly that, whatever some of you may have different opinions or varying opinions about how our provincial government, the BC government, responded to this crisis. In a way, we weren't, at the table necessarily sitting there in Victoria, but we had a very much I would almost call an insider look at how things were unfolding, and certainly in the context of the housing ministry. And I think, overall, the government, the BC government, deserves a lot of credit for how they responded to this crisis. They kept the economy, as open as they could, with the very broad range of essential services, including in our sector for property managers and building managers, which is hugely important. And I think they were really very quick to understand that this was a unique situation and a true crisis that they needed to help British Columbians navigate through it. And what we saw in particular with the housing ministry was Minister Robinson and her team. They were working extremely hard, and they were pulling all-nighters, and we were liaising with them. They were reaching out to us, and it was a very much a collaborative effort. So they deserve a lot of credit. And finally, I would like to say that BC Housing, as you're aware, that they were administering the temporary rent supplement, which I'll talk to in a quick moment. They too have done an incredible job in basically creating, the back end to administer this program. And I think prior to this recent extension, there were in the order of 90,000 applicants. And again, BC Housing deserves a lot of credit. So I would like to, acknowledge the hard work of government and the people behind government in the various ministries. When, as I said, we were, somewhat ahead of the curve here in terms of trying to proact to it, but very quickly, almost simultaneously, we're in touch with the provincial government to say, okay, this is getting serious. What are you thinking? And the conversations really centered around, they were obviously trying to address the crisis on three fronts. First of all, the health crisis. And then clearly the notion of food and shelter for the folks impacted. In addition, they were obviously having very in-depth conversations with the federal government, and in many respects, sort of waiting to see what the feds were going to do. In that context, I did multiple interviews when this all started, and probably during this 3.5 month period, probably in the order of 100 interviews on various topics. But I will say where I have much credit or give applause to the provincial government. Personally, I'm less enamored with what the federal government did. I mean, yes, they pushed a variety of programs out, but I really felt, and I still do feel, that they missed the mark from the beginning. That when you have 30% of households across Canada renting their homes, and when you have as much data as the federal government through CMHC on renters, really I felt that what they should have done immediately was have a renter support program, a very robust one. I think at the end of the day, it would have been obviously good for renters, and it would have been obviously helpful to our sector across the country. And probably, I guess, a post-mortem at some point in time will be done. I'm going to guess that it would have been a more efficient use of taxpayer funds. But again, that's for a conversation on another day. But I really feel that was a missed opportunity. It's really unfortunate. But in the context of the BC government here, our conversations in March were very much focused on, some sort of a renter support program. And we were very much pushing the rent bank. We felt that, there is existing structure, and it would be the most effective way, and it could be the most liberal in the sense that it could have, in fact, have covered, full monthly rent for renters, because under the concept, basically, these are micro loans. and the province could have, had these amounts repaid or structured some sort of a, rent payment forgiveness process. But they looked at this really hard, and we had multiple conversations about it. In fact, it suggested a hybrid, but they ended up deciding on the rent supplement, and that was their decision, and we feel that it was still a positive outcome for both renters in our sector. Subsequently, and I guess really in May, we argued that it could be enhanced and in fact extended, and now it has been extended, as you know, but not enhanced. But nevertheless, that was a decision they made, and it was still the only one of its type in Canada, and I think again demonstrated that they were trying to look at across all sectors, and certainly recognizing that renters in particular in a high cost area like Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, even Victoria, needed some help. And so we think that was a good decision, but like I said, there were multiple discussions about how that might be structured and could it be done in a different form. We as a group, we're very, very concerned about, how much rent will not get paid April 1st, partially because, the federal programs weren't going to come into effect until early April. Same thing with the temporary rent supplement, et cetera. But when April 1st came, within the first handful of days, we realized that, in fact, while there was certainly rent unpaid and there was, partial rent paid, et cetera, part of that was definitely driven by the fact that we provided a range of tools and support for our members and really the broader sector, because we eliminated our paywall basically in mid-March so that we could touch the entire rental, all landlords across the province, not just our members. And so we were giving them tools and support and all the information, including the rent deferral agreement. And, I think that helped mitigate some of the unpaid rent. But while April, I think in our own survey, we saw about 10% of renters paid no rent, which is not an insignificant number. Underlying that, we saw actually some really positive developments that, in fact, even though the rent supplement and the federal programs hadn't really kicked in or weren't available, that renters understood that they had a responsibility. I think certainly a lot of our messaging in the social media, et cetera, and the Premier and the Housing Minister as well, we're saying, listen, you have a responsibility to pay rent if you can. And I think, that message largely got through. And in fact, in May and June, we even saw sort of again, I think it's partially attributable to that funding from the feds and the province that we saw, even a better outcomes in terms of rent paid. And so, that was certainly a positive development. What that still meant is that, there would be a rent deficit, and really in mid-April, we had shifted our focus, frankly, from to that issue. We were already looking at sort of next steps in terms of our interaction with the province. I mean, they were really busy and trying to, get the rent supplement out and all the other issues. But we were starting a conversation about there's going to be rent deficit during the COVID period. It's going to create challenges for renters. It's going to create challenges for landlords, and we feel it's going to be real important that we find some solutions here. And that conversation continued, and like I said, we in May, early June, we were also really strongly encouraging them to enhance and extend the rent supplement. And then, thanks to the terrific support of our members and really landlords from across the province, we did a fairly aggressive I guess, outreach to the province to start talking about our sector returning to a state of normalcy, because they were phase 2, the restart program was very robust, yet we were not included in it. And that began some really serious and robust conversation with the week of basically the, I guess, 11th, 12th, of June with the province, and by the 19th, they had basically pushed out, a plan to allow us to return to a state of normalcy with the exception of no evictions for non-payment of rent. And the rent freeze was going to remain intact. And they also, noted that they would be announcing, subsequent measures with, I guess, sort of mid-July. And what we had advised you, our members, through the last e-news, or previous to the last e-news, was that basically what the province is going to be doing is, and they've effectively communicated this already because they're sitting right now, is they're creating what's called a COVID Act, so that as they move away from the continued extension of the state of emergency, what we'll see here is the eviction due to non-payment of rent during that the COVID period will be removed, and what is being contemplated here, and again, we've been involved in these conversations, is a mandated repayment program, and that renters will have to enter with their landlord. And if they don't, then the landlord will be able to provide a notice of tenancy and seek ending of the tenancy. At the same time, this repayment process is to run it through to the end of June 2021. If at any time during that period of time the renter defaults, then they as well, a notice to end of tenancy can be delivered, and the ending of the tenancy. So basically it's consistent with the province's message, in the sense that renters have a responsibility to pay their rent, and they have a responsibility vis-a-vis these unpaid rents, the rent deficits. So I appreciate that not everybody will think that's perfect, but when you look in the context of the overall situation, and I think in the context of what the province has tried to do, and like I said, we were very much involved in these conversations. I think this is an acceptable outcome, and we're creating some additional tools and supports to you. Once this COVID Act is announced, so that we can help you with a collection of these outstanding balances. So I think we're returning to normalcy. I think we're going to have some tools here, and legislative tools to collect those unpaid rents, and again, LandlordBC is going to continue to help you with that. As it pertains to the rent increase issue, with the extension of the rent supplement through the end of August, the province, and certainly we're going to continue to liaise with them. We would hope that this will all be resolved, by September 1st, that will, return to a state of normalcy in terms of communicate. Well, you can communicate rent increases, but in terms of the actual application of them. So, we're going to continue to pursue that and make sure that issue is resolved as well. But I think, again, just wanted to end on in terms of, this last few months. This is just a very brief overview. Needless to say, there were numerous conversations and dialogue with the province throughout this last 3.5 months. Is going to continue. But I feel that, we're, all things considered, we're not in too bad a place. Obviously, there are some of our sector who have, are going to, have experienced some hardship, and we need to navigate through that. But I mean, this is part of the challenge. No sector is left unscathed, and we're just trying to mitigate that to the fullest extent possible. In the next few months, couple of months are going to be, I think, just further work will be done to alleviate that to the extent possible. So with that, and I need to be cognizant of my time here. Just to give you a flavor for the issues that we've been talking to all levels of government, and again, like I said, the province in particular is where we do most of our advocacy. But just to highlight very quickly some of the issues that are sort of front and center for us, and will be over in the coming months. I mean, needless to say, in everything we do, I mean, we're always reminding government that one of the challenges for our sector, when we have uncontrollable expenses like property taxes and insurance, unfortunately, our income is controlled, and that's because, we live in a rent-controlled environment. So, our conversations always, ensure that the government understands this, and they do. It's just, this is the current reality. And so what we're doing and right now is we had an opportunity to make a submission for budget 2021. We do this every year, but this year in particular, we really focused on the need for the government to take a really hard look at property taxes in the context of our sector, and also insurance costs. I mean, clearly, if you have a purpose-built rental, your insurance costs haven't been quite as ridiculous as for stratas, but nevertheless, the insurance costs have definitely increased for purpose-built rental, and this is an issue that these are uncontrollable expenses driven by outside influences, and we need some sensitivity around this issue. So those are the two issues that we're really focusing on in terms of budget 2021. The other issue that is with the provincial government, you would have seen some information about this in our e-news. Probably last December you would have seen the first sort of indication of what is unfolding. The British Columbia government, basically, as part of their Clean BC strategy, and looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and having the province and all industry and all citizens, for that matter, look for renewable energy sources to provide their heating and electricity. One of the initiatives, pardon me, is something called an existing building code. And again, like I said, we alluded to that last fall. It's something that the province is working towards. And certainly, they're looking at all built form, including purpose-built rental. And it's an issue for the balance of this year. I'll be very candid with you, because and I think the conversations are pre-COVID were actually very constructive, and post-COVID here they're continuing. And I feel that the province really understands our sector better, and that many of our purpose-built rental buildings in particular are old, nearing the end of their functional life. The cost to fuel switch and do deep retrofits is prohibitive, and maybe not even the best. It doesn't really make business sense in many cases, and so those conversations are going well, but there's still work to do, and that's a major area that we're going to be focusing on. The other one is that when the province in September 2018 decided to change very much against our wishes as an industry to eliminate the 2% in the maximum allowable increase formula, they did promise a more robust and additional rent increase process. The current one on the RTA really does not work, and so we've been working since then virtually with them to try and create an additional rent increase process that is going to be applicable to capital expenditures. Is going to allow us to recover some reasonable portion of those additional investments that we make. This was to have been actually put before cabinet in March, and COVID-19 struck. But we're optimistic that in September that we're going to see this process work. We've actually had some recent conversations in terms of creating calculators and the logistics of this, and we're optimistic that this is going to be put into place, and that the process is going to really encourage our sector to invest in their rental buildings and units, and provide a vehicle to recover, some portion of those costs in a fairly easy, transparent fashion. We've it's been an interesting couple of years here, and certainly, we were, I think, when we look at where we had some good success, the Rental Housing Task Force, the recommendations that came out of that, really, I think, reflected a good, a responsible approach on the part of that committee, that they were prepared, they were sincere when they said they wanted to listen to our sector and be sensitive to our issues. So that was really largely a positive outcome that we were very, largely pleased with. The fact that we, fought back against mandatory PET policy, I think was really important, and had some interesting reactions that we as an organization had to face, and I'll just leave it at that. And certainly, the whole cannabis legislation really, we were very heavily invested in ensuring that our sector was properly represented, and I think we came out with legislation that very much supported our sector, and that was really important. How am I doing, Hunter? Okay, good. I'll just shift gears real quickly here, and just to touch base on two other areas. One is on the federal government. I mean, we work through CFAA. LandlordBC is part of CFAA as a member association, and I'm on the board of directors and part of an executive committee there. Certainly, we continue to pursue the GST on purpose-built rental to self-supply anomaly. And that was a broken promise by the Trudeau government. And so that's front and center again as we get post-COVID here. Right now, there's CMHC has made some changes on refinancing and equity takeout. That this is a huge issue that we're working with through CFAA right now to try and mitigate some of the harms on that front. And that this is an ongoing process. It's going to take more time. I don't know. I guess I'm not sure. I'm even cautiously optimistic that we're going to get this resolved the way we would like. But we'll see. There's still a lot of work to do. And finally, from the federal government, I mean, one of the issues that we feel, they're very committed, or they very much talk about investing in existing purpose-built rental vis-a-vis climate change and incentives for our sector to do that. Certainly, they have provided robust incentives for the community housing sector, which we applaud, and it's good that they've done that. But we need more support for private sector landlords to make those investments, and so that's a key area of advocacy, both directly and through CFAA in terms of the federal government. And then finally, I just want to touch on local government. And this was one of the, when I became involved with LandlordBC 6 years ago, actually July 1st as CEO, and that we made a strategic decision to get much more involved locally in terms of with municipal government. And it was really driven by the fact that, we saw there was a huge knowledge gap about our sector. And we also saw there was a huge need to get more rental housing built, purpose-built rental in particular. So that was sort of the conduit for building some really robust relationships with, first of all, really with the city of Vancouver, where we have an excellent relationship, and then other jurisdictions, City of Victoria, and other municipalities. And so we're very much recognized by municipal governments as an important stakeholder on issues not just related to rental housing, but housing in general. And that's really that's where we want it to be, and that's where we are. But having said that, it's interesting that in the last couple of years in particular, local governments have been proven to be a little more challenging since the last election cycle. And we're seeing that there's sort of an infringement on provincial jurisdiction, as at least in our view, and we're seeing sort of a pattern here, or a trend that's unfolding, where in effect through some licensing bylaws, etc., that there's in effect the risk of creation of multiple residential tenancy acts, which is hugely problematic. Residential rental tenure zoning, again, I think they've misinterpreted what the province intended when they gave them that new tool. And so we're working on this with other stakeholders like UDI and working directly with the province on these issues. And, I think, again, much of it is education and just persistent communication and reinforcement of the issue. And I think, we're making some progress there, but that's another area that you're going to see LandlordBC more and more involved with in the coming months. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation here, and we'll have questions at the end, and now I'll turn this over to Hunter. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, David. And I see that questions are coming in. So just a reminder, go ahead and use that Q&A feature to send us your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll get to those at the end of our presentation. So just a bit of an R2B update. It won't take too long to go through this part. Essentially, what we're doing here is going through and looking at the different things that have changed throughout the last really week. So we'll talk about ending tenancy, enforcing orders, rent increases, serving notice, notice of entry, and common areas. So starting out with ending tenancy, essentially, as of last week, landlords can, if need, end tenancy. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Landlords may not issue a 10-day notice or 1-month notice to address unpaid or repeatedly late rent or utilities if the missed or late payments occurred during the state of emergency. And as David mentioned already, there are going to be some more provisions released in the coming weeks to address the issue of unpaid rent during the state of emergency, including reaching an agreement as to how payments should occur throughout this tenancy. So setting that schedule with tenants. So just to recap again, ending tenancy in general is something that is an option now. And the notices that landlords can use are the 10-day notice for unpaid rent. Again, not during the pandemic state, so state of emergency. So if you had unpaid rent, for example, from February, and you didn't address it in February, you would be able to issue a 10-day notice for that. You'd also be able to issue a 1-month notice for cause, for any of the reasons listed on that. And some of the common issues in that are tenants are breaching the material term of the tenancy agreement. So for example, they're smoking in the rental unit, and based on the tenancy agreement, they're not supposed to smoke. That would be cause to end tenancy. And again, use the 1-month notice. The other 2 notices that exist through the residential tenancy branch and that are allowed to be used at this point are the 2-month notice and the 4-month notice. Now, the 2-month notice is definitely something that has had a bit of a spotlight shone on it before this pandemic, and especially even during this pandemic now, for its importance and for the type of duty of care that landlords need to consider when serving this notice. The 2-month notice is used in situations where a landlord, their spouse, or a close family member, defined either as a parent or child of the landlord or the landlord's spouse, is going to move into the rental unit and live there for at least 6 months. This is also used in situations where you sell a property and the new owner or their close family member wants to live in the rental unit. And of course, during the state of emergency up to last week, that notice could not be used. So if you had sold a property and the new owner wanted to move in, you were not able to give notice. This has now been lifted, and that notice can now be served. Again, with a 4-month notice, again, that's an option that's available to use as well. That notice is less common, certainly. It's used in situations where there are repairs or renovations that need to be conducted. But the bar for determining whether or not that notice should be used is quite high. So the repairs and renovations need to be so significant and extensive that the unit cannot be lived in for an extended period of time. So if it's just cosmetic work that's being done, such as painting the walls, putting in maybe new countertops, even flooring, that can be definitely disruptive to a tenancy, certainly. But at most, you're generally looking at maybe a few days, a week of the tenant being inconvenienced or possibly temporarily displaced. So those types of projects generally don't fall under the 4-month notice. It's generally for things much, much more extensive, where it's a large project that will require the unit to be empty, as mentioned, for an extended period of time. This notice is also used in situations where the building is being demolished. So moving on to the next notice, or the next topic here is enforcing orders. Now, before the state of emergency and the ministerial order that followed came into place, many landlords had gone through the process of ending tenancy and applying and potentially acquiring an order of possession. And this is done through the residential tenancy branch. But during the state of emergency, up to last week, enforcement of those orders was stopped. So that is now something that is an option again as of July 2nd. So you'll as of Thursday, you'll be able to apply through the Supreme Court for a writ of possession. We do encourage all landlords to talk to their tenants before actually going through this process. So if you have that order of possession, the tenant hasn't moved out, have a conversation with them, let them know that, this is now something that you're able to do, and hopefully the tenant will leave and you won't have to go through this process. One, it's quite disruptive to them, but it's also obviously a costly process that you would like to try to avoid. Rent increases were addressed in the Ministerial M195, and while landlords can serve a rent increase, they're not considered effective during the state of emergency. So essentially, it's kind of the same situation that we've been in since March. So if you had served a rent increase and it was effective for sometime during the state of emergency, the effective date is essentially delayed until the end of that state of emergency. Now, serving notices, and this isn't just specifically a notice to tenancy, this could be any type of notice. During the, again, state of emergency, we have not been able to serve notices in person. And there's some really good rationale behind that. Clearly, we want to try to limit in-person interaction as much as possible to try to reduce the risk of the spread of COVID-19. So they made that part of the ministerial order. So there was no questions about what you were allowed or not allowed to do regarding serving notice. When we look at the updated ministerial order, that prohibition has been lifted. So you can now serve documents in person. You can also use other methods of service though. So this is something to be aware of, that while you are now allowed to serve things in person, you don't have to serve things in person. You could post a notice on a tenant's door. You could place notice in a tenant's mailbox, send it by mail or registered mail through Canada Post. Those are all valid methods of service. And we do recommend that you use caution when considering whether or not you want to serve something in person. And really limit it to those things that are really vital to serving in person. If there's a really strict deadline as to when the tenant needs to get something, and you really want to make sure that they get it right away, that might make sense to serve it in person. But otherwise, you really, again, do want to limit that type of interaction. So what about email? During, again, the state of emergency under the previous ministerial order, and specifically a director's order from the residential tenancy branch, landlords and tenants were allowed to serve documents via email. Now it is, in fact, 2020, but up to then, there has been nothing in the Residential Tenancy Act or regulations or policy guidelines or even director's orders that allowed landlords or tenants to use email. This is something that has been talked about for years. It was mentioned in the Resident Rental Housing Task Force. And with service in person being removed, or when it was removed temporarily, the residents or tenants of rent, and specifically the director, created what's known as a director's order, allowing landlords and tenants to use email. That order has now been rescinded, now that personal service is allowed again. But that doesn't mean email is necessarily going away. It's just going away for the time being. It is something that will likely return at a future date, actually likely this fall. So keep an eye on that in our e-news through LandlordBC. So notice of entry. Another important aspect of any tenancy is being able to enter a tenant's unit to conduct inspections or repairs. And when this initial ministerial order came out at the end of March, there was a prohibition on landlords entering units without the consent of their tenant. And again, there was some good logic behind that we want to try to limit close interaction between not just landlords and tenants, but people in general. It has nothing to do specifically with landlords and tenants. It's just trying to limit those interactions. Now, that was in place for several months, and as of last week, that has been repealed. So landlords can now serve a notice of entry and enter a tenant's unit. Now, much like serving a notice in person, while this is something that you are allowed to do, it is something that we recommend you use some caution. An abundance of care is certainly warranted during these, as mentioned multiple times, unprecedented times. So try to limit your interactions with tenants, try to limit entering a tenant's unit to things that are really only necessary. Additionally, if you are going to enter a tenant's unit, then you're expected to follow the direction of the provincial health officer. So that includes things like wearing masks and practicing safe physical distancing. So keeping at least 2 meters apart and wearing a mask, washing your hands before, washing them after, wiping down surfaces and disinfecting surfaces specifically is still something that is recommended, in fact, expected of landlords, especially when entering a tenant's unit. So common areas have always been somewhat confusing in terms of access. There's various pieces of information on this, but early in this pandemic, many landlords took the responsible step, at least we feel responsible step, of closing common facilities such as pools, gyms, and game zones. And truthfully, I think most tenants understood why this was happening. We didn't hear any significant issues with that. It made sense. These are spaces that are not designed for physical distancing. In fact, quite the opposite. The whole point of these spaces generally is that you're there to socialize. So by closing these types of facilities in purpose-built rental buildings, this really allowed and enforced people to not interact in that way. So this was supported by the Ministerial Order Mr. 89, and it's continued to be supported under the most recent of 195. Landlords that choose to keep these facilities closed during this pandemic are not required to provide compensation to their tenants. Though it is important to note that it is a temporary closure. So if you are choosing to use this as an opportunity to close a certain facility permanently, you would have to provide compensation to your tenant. So it's only the temporary closures that do not require compensation. Of course, in all common areas, increased cleaning and disinfecting of high-touch surfaces such as elevator panels and door handles is encouraged to reduce the risk of transmission. So that is definitely something that you still want to take into account when your day-to-day operations. The risk of spreading COVID-19 certainly has lessened as our numbers in the province have lessened, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So being vigilant, staying vigilant is still important. We'll just take a moment to thank our sponsors, the Home Depot. You can see more information about the Home Depot Pro program at homedepot.ca/pro. So I see that quite a few questions have come in, and David's back on the line. Thank you. I'm just going to take a moment and we'll get those questions up and running. So this question, we'll start with a question about our advocacy. This one was sent in advance. So, you know, as you mentioned, David, LandlordBC is highly respected for its professionalism and transparency. And we're also recognized for our engagement of a broad range of stakeholders, including tenant advocates. Why do you feel that it's so important to build these relationships and engage a broad range of stakeholders? And how has that helped LandlordBC in the advocacy work that we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I think basically 6 years ago, when we were deciding how we wanted our organization to be perceived and how we were going to be successful in advancing the interests of our sector, it was very obvious, very fast that it was critical that, you know, we not work in a vacuum, that we engage all stakeholders, and that first of all, so that they would better understand our organization, our sector, and the issues and challenges that our sector experiences, and basically, I know there was. We're thinking back to that time. Even some members of our board, I suppose, were unsure as to why we were building a really close relationship with, like, TRAC, for example, one of the better known tenant advocacy groups. But those have been really important relationships, and we have regular dialogue with TRAC, with the Nonprofit Housing Association, the Co-op Housing Association, UDI. There's a whole range of stakeholders. And I think they make us a better organization, and they definitely make us a better advocate. And, it has helped in the context of all our work with all levels of government, because not only are we talking about our sector and the challenges, but, these folks too, and when they're doing their advocacy and having their conversations with government, they're bringing our perspectives to the table because now they understand them. So it's been, it's really, we call it a strategy, but from my perspective, it's really a no-brainer. This is how you need to build those relationships.
Fantastic, thank you. So, question that I'm going to take. The question is, can landlords now post notices on a tenant's door? Really simply, the answer is yes. In fact, throughout this entire pandemic, you've been able to post notices on tenant's door. You're just not allowed to serve things in person. And to understand the difference, posting on the door means exactly that. You take a piece of paper and you post it on the tenant's door, put it in their mailbox. Serving it in person means serving it directly to them. So taking a piece of paper and handing it to them when they take it from you. So the answer to that is yes. Move on to the next question. So as we spent a significant amount of time on this webinar talking about advocacy, clearly LandlordBC, one of our focuses is advocacy at all levels of government. And I'm sure that there are challenges with that. What would you say is the greatest challenge when it comes to advocacy?
Well, the greatest challenge is really is setting the stage for the the relationship. And LandlordBC was really very much a brand new organization. Just 2013, July 2013, when we first formed, and we were an amalgamation of two other associations. Again, our strategy was going forward to ensure that we were very much at every table when it came to legislation and policy-driven issues. And so the greatest challenge in the early stages of our organization was to get that credibility, build those relationships, and be looked at as a true partner and respected as a true partner. We're there, and we're very proud of that. But of course, with that comes a responsibility to ensure that we continue to be that partner, to have that respect of all levels of government. And so that's something that we work very hard at. And when in the engagement and regular engagement with all levels of government, that we want to ensure that that they can trust us, and that that they can come to us for our viewpoint. We're not always going to agree, but they can be confident that it's going to be solutions driven. It's going to be communicated in a constructive and respectful fashion. And really, I think just ensuring that sort of strategy and those sentiments continue is I think it's a challenge, but it's just something that's really important to continue to focus on.
Fantastic. So the next question that we have here is, do we have any insight as to the likelihood of the state of emergency being extended beyond July 7th? I know that there was, of course, been talk about a COVID Act. What is your insight on that?
It's not unlikely that the state of emergency will be extended beyond July 7th. What I want the listeners to appreciate is that our sector, through Ministerial Order 195, as of June 24th, pardon me, we're being removed from the state of emergency. And the next piece of it is the COVID Act that's unfolding, which, on one hand, it's probably intended to eliminate the need for continuing state of emergency, but I don't know how far that's going to go in the early stages here. It may be the COVID Act may be sort of an evolving process. But what we have reasonable confidence is that our sector, and again, I was specifically referring to that mandated rent repayment initiative, that would have to be legislated. And so we see our sector by and large removed from the state of emergency, in a perfect world, by mid-July.
So the next question, when can we resume rent increases?
Yeah, again, I touched on that very briefly. Certainly, that's something the province is monitoring very closely, and they're obviously sensitive to it as well from both the renters and landlords' perspective. There's still more conversation with them around when that's going to be effective, but we're looking at typically in September, we learn what the next year's maximum allowable increase will be. So that needs to happen. They need to come to grips with what the CPI will be for 2021. We should have some indication of that soon, or we do our own estimates on that. The fact that the rent supplement has been extended a couple of months, I think they've bought themselves, or they feel they needed a little more time before they make that decision. And then the additional rent increase process as well. I mean, that needs to be completed. So there's a few moving parts around that, but we're hopeful that come September, everything will fall into place on that front, and that we can truly get to a full state of normalcy for our sector.
Okay, well, so that is the end of our Q&A session for today. Thank you to all of our attendees who've sent in your thoughtful questions. And thank you again to our sponsors, the Home Depot Pro. And don't forget to sign up for Landlord BC's newsletter to make sure you stay in the know. That's information about that can be found at www.landlordbc.ca. Thank you.
That's for non-members, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. So yeah,
you should make that clear.
So if you're not a member of ours, make sure you sign up for that e-newsletter.
And if you're not a member of ours, why aren't you? Right, Hunter?
Exactly. David's always asking that.
I'm always asking that. All right.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks, Hunter. Great job.